Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's NQA webinar, where we're going to look at the ISO standard ISO 20121, which is the Event Sustainability Management System standard. So I think we'll probably take around about maybe 30, 35, 40 minutes or so today. Will be an opportunity to ask any questions that you have at the end. If you have a look at the little control panel that you can see, there's the option there to type in some questions. You can do that either as you go, or you can leave it until the end. And I'll take a look at those questions towards the end, and if there's answers I can give you immediately, then I will do so, and if there's answers where I can go off and find out the information that you need and come back to you, then I'll be more than happy to do that as well. So we'll make a start. So as I mentioned, we're going to look at the standard ISO 20121, Sustainable Events Management System standard. We'll start just with a quick introduction to myself and a quick overview of NQA sustainability services. We'll then get into in a little bit of detail the actual requirements of the Event Sustainability Management System itself, ISO 20121. And towards the end, we'll have a look at how NQA can support you in achieving certification to the standard. And then, as I mentioned, any questions and answers that you might have, pop them into the chat box, and I'll do my best to answer them at that point. So just a little bit of background to NQA first. So NQA is a global certification and verification body. In the UK, we provide a range of sustainability kind of related standards, which you can see in the orange box there. So the one that we're looking at today is ISO 20121. We also offer various carbon related verification to carbon related standards. So ISO 14064-1, which is quantifying and reporting your carbon emissions. PAS 2060 and ISO 14068-1 are about carbon neutrality. PAS 2080 is about carbon management in buildings and infrastructure, and ISO 26000 is the social responsibility guidelines. So all of our sustainability verifiers, including for ISO 20121, are also carbon and greenhouse gas verifiers and sustainability verifiers. So everybody's got a very strong background in what they do when we provide the certification services. And of course, NQA also provide certification to almost every other ISO standard you can think of, quality, environment, health, safety, information security, energy, and so on. So I'm Stephen Burt, I'm the Carbon and Sustainability Services Director here at NQA. So I look after all of our services around those areas. Amber Dixon is a Sustainability Assurance Manager, and whenever you deal with NQA in relation to anything to do with carbon or sustainability, it will be one of the two of us that you deal with primarily. And of course, we have a team of carbon and sustainability verifiers and assessors that work alongside us as well. So just a quick overview of ISO 20121, the standard itself then. It's worth just pointing out that it's been fairly recently updated. So the current version of the standard is the one you can see on the right hand side there, which is the 2024 version of the standard. For some reason, my copy of it doesn't have quite as pretty cover as the 2012 standard, which you can see on the left. So it was developed in 2012. It was developed for the primarily or partly because of the Olympic Games for that year. And it was published initially in 2012 ahead of those Olympic Games. The 2024 version was published around about the middle of this year, April I think it was, and there's not a million things different about the two versions. You know, primarily it's minor updates between the two, but if anybody's listening who are currently certified to ISO 21221, the 2012 version, then you should be aware of the upgrade requirements to the new 2024 version. It's worth pointing out that you know, wherever possible, NQA offer our services as UCAS accredited, so accredited by United Kingdom Accreditation Service, who govern and regulate everything that we do. However, UCAS don't actually currently offer accreditation to certification bodies like NQA for ISO 21221. So there's no fixed timeline for that reason to transition from the old version to the new version. But usually, and in NQA's case, there's a 3-year timeline. So that's what we've chosen to apply. Just a quick overview of some of the changes between the old version and the new version. As I mentioned, it's relatively minor overall. You know, the really only significant changes are the need to consider climate change when planning around your internal and external issues, your social, your economic and your environmental issues. That's a common change that applies to all the ISO management system standards included that requirement. There's an extension to a very, very useful table in the standard itself, table A1, which gives a list of potential interested parties. That's a really good table, and they've added to that when they've published the new standard. There's some changes, additions and changes to the wording which needs to be in your sustainable development policy. There's another really useful table in there, table C1, which has been expanded upon. So that's the table that provides issues to consider when identifying your sustainable development issues. So I always think of ISO 21221 as comparable to ISO 14001 for those of you that know about that standard. So ISO 14001, you know, you identify your environmental aspects, you work out which ones are significant, and more or less the whole of the management system follows thereafter around the control of those significant environmental aspects. And ISO 21221 takes a similar approach. It asks you to identify your sustainable development issues, work out which of those are significant to you, and again, more or less the rest of the management system falls out around the controls for those significant sustainable development issues. So table C1, invaluable for identifying the sustainable development issues which the management system needs to control for your events processes. There is one new clause, planning of changes. So this was actually included in the old version of the standard, but it was kind of lost a little bit within another clause. So they've made it a standalone clause. It's a new requirement. And one thing they have significantly added to is a supply chain management clause in the standard. So most events, in my experience, involve a whole number of contractors that help to deliver the event management process. And the standard recognizes that. It recognizes the issues around the supply chain, and the clause for supply chain management and procurement in ISO 21221 has been significantly strengthened and expanded upon for the 2024 version. So the purpose of ISO 21221 itself is to provide the framework for improving the sustainability of events. So events generally, you know, they are of all kinds of different sizes and all kinds of different places and attract all kinds of different people from all kinds of different locations. There is a significant environmental and social and economic impact as a result of events, and ISO 21221 provides a framework for managing and improving those impacts. So it applies to all organizations of all types and sizes, you know, charities, companies, even individuals as well running events. It provides a structure for the requirements of the standard, which aligns with Annex SL. And for those of you who don't know what Annex SL is, that's the standard structure which ISO management system standards are organized around. We'll come to that in a little bit more detail later on, but it makes it very easy to integrate this particular standard with your existing ISO 9001 certification, for example. An event alone cannot claim conformance to the standard. The standard is about the management system, so it relates to the management system of an event or a series of events. You know, so you can't say that a particular event is compliant with ISO 21221, but what you can say is that the management system for that event is compliant with ISO 21221. And kind of following on from that a little bit, any claims of conformity to ISO 21221 has to be reflective of what the management system represents, i.e. is it all events that an organisation is running, or is it specific events that an organisation is running? And here at NQA, we've had examples of both of those. You know, a organisation who wants to organise a management system for just one big event, and we can offer ISO 21221 certification for that, or you know, a company that runs events all the time, an event management company that just runs dozens or even hundreds of events a year. So it applies equally to both. And the governing principles within the standard, they cover a range of sustainability topics, but the kind of thread throughout it is to frame that around environmental, social and economic issues related to the event itself. Interestingly, the social issues do cover elements of health and safety to a very limited extent as well. Just some examples of organisations then which operate management systems which are certified to ISO 21221. So I'm not claiming for a second that all of these are NQA clients, but some of them are. But you can see the range in there. You know, huge event organisations like the International Olympic Committee, for example, to event venues like Excel in London, to organisations which you would think would have nothing to do with events, generally speaking, like Interpol. So it's applicable to a whole host of different organisations that run events on a one-off or on a series basis. And just an example of sustainable events and how to do it. So this is the band Coldplay. These guys have had quite a strong commitment to the sustainability of the gigs that they play and the tours that they do for a long time. And although, as far as I'm aware, the tours that they do and the management system around those is not certified to ISO 21221. It just gives you a really good real life example that we can all picture in our heads of what might be involved. So there's a very strong environmental focus to the sustainable development of these tours and these gigs, and to a lesser extent the social and the economic impact, although it is touched upon in there. And typically, you know, this is a kind of thing that we would expect in an ISO 21221 management system to recognise and act upon around events themselves. So obviously there's the carbon dioxide emissions associated with the event. They've reported on that. They've also done a tree planting exercise where one tree is planted for each of the tickets that they sell, each of the concert goers. They have invested in solar-powered river interceptors near to the venues where they play to control any kind of related water pollution from runoff and that type of things. They issue people with LED wristbands and they get them back for reuse afterwards, 86% they've pointed out. They use battery-powered systems for their shows, and that happens in two ways. They have dance floors, and the dance floors, when you dance on them, it creates momentum, which charges batteries up that help to power the shows. And they also have bicycles at the shows, which are tied up to batteries as well, so that concert goers can jump on the bike and charge the batteries a little bit as well. They also partner with green travel providers. They report on the average power consumption per show. They provide free water refill stations at all of their shows for everybody. The flights that they take, they power those through sustainable aviation fuel, so biofuel. They report on the diversion and the reuse and the recycling and the composting of their waste. They talk about donations of excess food and excess toiletries to food banks and other charities. And they talk about their financial support to various environmental organisations that they provide, and also the reduction in freight impacts. But what they're doing is measuring their most recent tour against the previous tour that they did and reporting this. So that just gives us a nice tangible example of what event sustainability, the sustainable development issues that might be addressed as a result of, in this case, a concert touring gigs. So the benefits of implementing the standard. So as I mentioned earlier, it's very easily adapted and integrated into this Annex SL system. So if you have an existing ISO 9001 quality or ISO 14001 environmental or even ISO 45001 health and safety management system, this is organized along the same lines, so it slots in very nicely. There's lots and lots of commonalities. Obviously, there's opportunity to identify cost savings through improved performance, being transparent about the performance of your event. So there's, lots of much heightened interest from delegates and participants, local communities in the events that they attend and that take place around them. And transparent reporting on that is an important aspect. It helps you to identify areas of risk and to mitigate these. So, for example, security measures. It encourages continual improvement. It helps to achieve your goals and your objectives. Helps to meet those stakeholder expectations and helps with the brand enhancement side of things. There's lots of claims out there about various events, ranging from the World Cup, the Football World Cup, all the way down. There's lots of events which make claims around how sustainable they are. ISO 21221 provides the evidence around those claims. It helps with that brand enhancement and meeting the stakeholder expectations particularly. So, it doesn't only cover event organizers, it also covers their supply chain as well. So it really applies to not just the event organizers, but also the event owners, the workforce, the people that take part in organizing the event and making it happen. Supply chain we'll come back to because it's such a key issue. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail shortly. The participants, the attendees, any regulatory bodies and communities. So it recognizes, ISO 21221 recognizes all the interested parties that have a stake, that stakeholders in a particular event, and it requires them to be identified and for their concerns to be built into the management system itself. It also helps with improved planning for compliance with any legal requirements that there are. So obviously there's various environmental requirements that apply to events. There's various health and safety requirements that apply to events, but we shouldn't forget there's also various social requirements that apply to events. So things like waste, energy, carbon reporting, health and safety. There's a lot of lifting equipment at big events. There's a lot of electrical equipment at big events. There's lots of access issues at big events. So need to think about things like discrimination, equality, accessibility, even gender pay gaps, protected characteristics, and so on when organising events. And many of those things are governed by legislation. And ISO 21221 has a process for identifying what the legal requirements are and building that into the management system to make sure that you are compliant. Health and safety, I mentioned I would come back to, and that's because it's such a big issue in the events industry. There's actually a standalone industry guide to health and safety itself, and there's also, it's by no means the industry that has the most number of accidents and incidents, but with all the equipment, particularly around the rigging and the de-rigging side of things for stands and lights and AV equipment, there's lots of health and safety hazards and risks. And ISO 21221 recognises those as a legal requirement and expects arrangements to be in place for conformance with that. Social and governance controls, we've discussed access discrimination, but also labour standards as well. They differ in different countries, need to be aware of those. Community considerations and noise, so events like festivals particularly. Even I was at Silverstone on an ISO, Silverstone Formula One on an ISO 21221 audit in the summer of this year, and I was amazed when you drive to Silverstone. It's tiny little villages as you drive up there, and nice old quaint houses and all that type of thing. And the traffic running through these villages is very significant. All that type of thing needs to be managed for community consideration, noise point of view. I'm sure Glastonbury is the same. I'm sure the neighbours around Glastonbury are communicated with around the event, and that side of things managed carefully. Anti-bribery as well, so not so much of a problem in the UK, but it is a problem in some parts of the world, and those kind of social and governance controls should be built in where applicable. It also helps with communication channels with suppliers and with delegates as well. I saw a great example when I was doing an ISO 21221 audit in Manchester this year. Really, really good examples there of communication with the delegates. They actually had people, a team of people on the exhibition floor space going around asking the delegates what they thought of the sustainability of the event, what ideas they had about the sustainability of the event, and then took that information for review and fed it back into the future planning of their events. And interestingly, delegates and suppliers have all got some really, really valuable ideas about the event management process itself. So I said I would come back to supply chain management because this is a key clause in the standard. It expects you to appoint your suppliers based partly on their sustainable development policies and performance. It also expects, when you identify those sustainable development issues for management within the management system, you should be identifying some, if not all, of these issues around here. So we'll work through them quickly one by one. So, the caterers that are supplying the catering at the event itself, often they'll be thinking about, or they should be thinking about, the sourcing of the food that's provided, what they're going to do with the food waste, composting options rather than landfill options, the menu options that they can provide around calorific value of the food, the quality of the food, options for vegans, vegetarians, meat eaters, and so on, and also food bank donations. So again, in the summer, I think it was, I did a ISO 21221 audit with it was an American events company, and they had some really impressive stuff going on where the excess food was being packed up by volunteers from the delegates. So they asked the delegates who would like to volunteer. The delegates got up early in the morning on the last day, helped to box and pack up the excess food, and then a charity came and took it for food bank donations. So some good examples there of the catering supply chain and what they can be doing. The venues themselves, so obviously the location of the venue is important in minimizing travel, or at least having public transport accessibility. The energy consumption and the carbon emissions around the venue itself. Where does it source its power from? How does it minimize energy consumption and improve energy efficiency? What transport links does it have? Can people get there without their cars? Can people even potentially get there without getting on a plane? These are all considerations. The materials that are used. So one of the things that I do when I do ISO 21221 audits is attend an event. So I'll always go to one of the events that the client is running. And I ask questions of delegates and suppliers about what their thoughts are. And 9 times out of 10, carpets come up as a big issue. So the exhibition spaces usually get laid with carpet. Often it's on a one-off basis for that one event, and then at the end of the event you're left with a huge amount of carpet that previously would just go to landfill. But I've seen some really clever choices made around the materials that are used, the recycling route for the carpets now, and often the reuse of those carpets, and even perhaps the donation of those carpets to housing associations and so on for their housing stock. Stand shells as well. I've seen some clever stuff going around. One of the clients I was with in Manchester in the summer, they had a competition for the most sustainable stand that was on their premises, and one of the very big, I think it was a wind power organisation, had built their stand entirely out of cardboard. So that would never have been heard of a few years ago, because everybody, you know, wants it to be glossy and colourful and all this kind of thing. But this very, very large company had brought along a cardboard stand, and it looked great. And they won the prize for the most sustainable stand because they've chosen to do that. So there's lots of options around what the stands are actually made of these days, as well as the stand shells. The banners, the graphics, the name badges, all of these things, the agendas can all be electronic these days. Often you'll see apps used, people using their phones to access the agenda, and people using their phones to show their name badges, all that type of thing that can take place. And alternative recyclable, reusable materials, so using cardboard or paper in place of plastic, or ideally not using it at all, for example, in name badges. Transportation is important, so delegate travel is a very obvious consideration to think about, but also using lighter materials. So I've seen a good example of reusable stand shells that are made from stronger but lighter materials, so they last longer, they can be reused far more times, and the transport of them to the venue uses far less fuel because they're lighter. The lorries don't use as much fuel carrying them. There's also options for improved logistics for the transport of the materials, so making sure that the wagons are bulked to the maximum permitted, and also the use of alternative fuels. So when I was at another client for another event, the trucks that were coming in and out delivering the grandstands and delivering the exhibition space and all that type of thing, they were partly fueled by HVO, which is hydro-treated vegetable oil, like a biofuel, which cuts the carbon emissions quite significantly. Accommodation and hotel selection as well. So an event I was at, the same one in Manchester in the summer, The hotel that I stayed in, which was next door in Manchester, had been selected by the event organisers along with a few others because of its own commitment to sustainability. And I can remember standing in the lift going up to my room, and on the wall of the lift were a whole load of evidence around the sustainable development policies and performance of that particular hotel. So thinking about that's an important thing. Waste management and minimisation. So often waste contractor will be amongst the suppliers to an event to deal with all the waste, knowing where that waste goes to, making sure it gets disposed of legally, of course, but also making sure that it's diverted from landfill as far as possible. And that's true of the food waste as well. Food waste results in significant amounts of methane. Methane's a very, very potent global warming gas, much more so than carbon dioxide. So managing the food waste as well as all the other wastes into recycling, composting, or ideally reuse is the best option there. Merch or merchandise, getting that in place or not is the question. It's one of my kind of bugbears is the amount of kind of low quality merchandise, which is often at events, things like charging cables, branded charging cables that last for one use before they break, things like even reusable cups, which if you took one from every event you went to, you'd have 100 and you only need one. So whether or not merchandise should be provided, and often it's plastic, often it's single use, often it's low quality. So getting the merchandising correct is an important part as well. And then we've mentioned the health safety side of things already, but the security side of things, the security teams play a big part in some of the social aspects of the event, accessibility, communications, welfare arrangements for staff are an important thing to consider as well as for delegates. So, toilets, for example, enough toilets. And then you've got the electrical teams and the rigging teams, all of which have health and safety aspects. So this is a framework for ISO 21221. You can see if you're already aware of other ISO standards, it follows quite closely. The starting at the top, all of the clause 4s are more or less similar to what you'll find in other ISO standards, as are the clause 5s, with the exception of identifying sustainable development issues. And the clause 7s are very similar. Clause 8, 9, and 10 are very similar. So you can see how it's organized. So we'll work through them very quickly, one by one. The scope is the first clause. That's just what it applies to. Clause 2 and 3, normative references, terms and definitions, we don't need to worry about. Those should be fairly self-explanatory. Clause 4, like all the other ISO management system standards, is about the context of the organization. So it's about identifying the internal and external issues and the risks and opportunities associated with those. Making sure that you've identified your interested parties. So that's the table A1, gives you the really good overview that you need within that. Getting the scope of the management system right. So is it one event? Is it several events? What organization does it apply to? Putting the arrangements in place for the actual management system itself. So, policy, manual, procedures perhaps. And then the sustainable development principles and mission statement. So that's really about pulling a mission statement together. That's over and above the requirement for a policy, by the way. But table A2 at the back of the standard provides the input that you need to be able to put that mission statement together. Clause 5 is about leadership and commitment. 9 times out of 10, the way that I audit that is to sit down with the senior leaders in the events management company and interview them. Clause 5 also needs a policy, so a sustainable development policy to be produced, and you need to define the roles, responsibilities and authorities within the Sustainable Events Management System. Clause 6, this is a key one. It's not to be lost because it's just kind of, you know, in the middle of the standard somewhere, but the actions to address risks and opportunities. So what you're expected to do there is using the information about interested parties and what your internal and external issues are. Often that's achieved through a SWOT analysis or a PESTLE analysis. It needs you to identify the sustainable development issues and evaluate whether they're significant or not. So this is really similar to what you would do with your environmental aspects in ISO 14001, but it's also really similar to what you would do with your health and safety hazards and risks in ISO 45001. And really the whole management system, the arrangements for it then fall out of that process. So table C1 at the back of the standard gives you you know, a pretty comprehensive list of what those sustainable development issues might be. It provides you a starting point because it won't cover everything because it's not bespoke to your event, but it provides a great start point. It also requires you to plan for any of your relevant legal and other requirements, and it requires you to set objectives for event sustainability management and produce plans to actually achieve those as well. Clause 7 looks very familiar from all the other ISO standards as well. This is just about having the right resources, having competent people. So this is about sustainable development competency or sustainable events competency. So having those people competent to actually manage the process and deliver the process. It's also about awareness, making sure that both internal and external people, including suppliers, are aware of the arrangements for running the event in a sustainable manner. Communications, internal, external communications, and documented information. In other words, controlling the documents that arise as a result of the ISO 21221 system. Clause 8 is about actually managing it, the event itself, so managing the operations. Often we'll see documented procedures here which will detail how the event management process is intended to operate, and that might be all the way from, you know, initially the concept of the event all the way through to the post-event review process. So often there's operational control procedures in there which describe how that process should take place. But also in there is a need to consider how to manage changes. So changes take place, you know, when COVID happened, a lot of planned events had to go online. When you know, there's been significant security incidents in the past, then managing for the change around those security incidents, perhaps moving venue or perhaps needing to introduce unanticipated changes such as additional security checks, that type of thing would come under the managing changes piece. And supply chain management. So as I've mentioned, that's a really critical piece. That's about making sure that when you tender the contracts for the event management service, that you include enough information in that tender process to allow you to evaluate whether the suppliers can actually demonstrate their own capability to help you to run the event sustainably. So as I mentioned, very, very typically in the event management industry, there's an event management company, and then there's maybe half a dozen key critical suppliers under there who provide the actual delivery service itself. So getting them on board, making sure that they're aligned with your thinking is absolutely critical. And the tender process and the contract review process is the way that ISO 21221 manages that. So this just kind of expands slightly on what I've just said. You know, most of the work's undertaken in the supply chain itself, whether that be materials or contracted services, including the actual people working at the event. And it's around, you know, thinking about health, safety, thinking about hazardous and general waste, thinking about the social impact. The transportation is often subcontracted in terms of getting kit to and from the event and getting people to and from the event. You know, so using local suppliers, local workforce, for example, making sure that the suppliers that you contract have the correct employment standards in place are all important, and that fair contract terms are applied and respected as well. Clause 9, we're getting to the end, performance evaluation. So again, you'll recognize this from other ISO standards if you're involved with them. It's about monitoring performance, analyzing that performance and evaluating whether you're on track for your performance. Internal audit and management review, both again very common in other ISO management system standards. So really a checking process to do the internal audits and then feed the results into a management review, and that should lead to continual improvement. So clause 10 is about continual improvement, and also if there is anything that's comes up that's not conformant with the standard ISO 21221, you know, identifying those non-conformities and putting corrective action in place is part of the overall continual improvement cycle as well. So how can NQA help to support you in achieving ISO 21221? If you have a look on our website, there's some really good ISO 21221 case studies on there. There's a series of webinars that we've done. This is just the most recent one. There's some fact sheets on ISO 21221. The eagle-eyed amongst you will spot that the version of the fact sheet that I've used is a 2012 version. I'll need to update this. It should be the 2024 version. And there's blogs and there's quick reads. If you need a consultant to help you through the process with ISO 21221, we've got really good experience with really good consultants who are super experienced, and we can pass you their details as well. Training, we have ISO 21221 e-learning introduction level training. That's available on our website if anybody was interested in that. Excuse me. And lastly, what does the actual process look like? So you can ask myself or my colleagues for a quote, and we use a number of different factors to determine what that quote is. You know, complexity, the size of your organization, number of events, those types of things are used to determine a quote. What happens then is a sort of expert event sustainability assessor or auditor comes and does your certification audit. So that takes the form of 2 visits. Stage 1 is primarily a documentation review just to make sure that there's no big gaps in your management system arrangements. And then we do a stage 2, which is about whether the management system's been implemented. So at that stage 2, almost always we make a point of going to visit a live event and actually seeing it running. And that helps because we obviously get to see the sustainable development issues in practice, but we also get a chance at those events to sit down just 15 minutes each and have a chat with the key suppliers to the event. And that gives us lots and lots of audit trails to hook onto to make sure that the management system's conformant overall. And then step 3, once you've had your stage 2 audit and you've got the sustainable event certificate on your wall, then we have an annual surveillance audit requirement thereafter. So years 1 and 2, we will do a short duration annual surveillance audit just to make sure everything's still being maintained. And then because the certificates are issued for 3 years, in the third year, we'll perform another recertification audit, which is kind of similar to the stage 2, at which point your certificate's issued for another 3 years thereafter. So I think that covers everything. Hopefully that's given you a good overview of some of the drivers for the standard. Hopefully it's given you a good overview of some of the arrangements or the requirements for the standard, and therefore some of the arrangements that you might put in place to meet those requirements. And hopefully it gives you an overview of how NQA can help you with that as well. So I don't think we've got any questions, so we'll call it a day there. So happy Friday, everybody. Thank you for attending, and I hope you have a lovely weekend. Thanks very much. Goodbye.